There are moments in the bold and the beautiful when the true battle is not between enemies, but within a family that no longer agrees on what loyalty means. And what we are witnessing now inside the Forrester dynasty feels less like a disagreement and more like the beginning of a fracture that could reshape everything this legacy has stood for, because at the center of it all is not just scandal or betrayal, but a deeper, more painful question. How far should forgiveness go when trust has already been broken beyond recognition, and whether unity is still worth preserving when it begins to demand silence in the face of manipulation? And in this moment, no one embodies that conflict more profoundly than Eric Forrester. A man who has built his life not only on fashion and power but on the belief that family, above all else, must remain intact, even when it is tested, even when it is strained, even when it is pushed to the edge of collapse. Eric's reaction to what Ivy Forrester has done is not one of indifference, nor is it one of denial. It is something far more complicated, something that comes from years of watching this family survive countless storms, betrayals, secrets, and painful choices. And each time finding a way to come back together, to rebuild, to forgive, and that history shapes the way he sees the current situation. Because while others see Ivy's actions as unforgivable, as a line that cannot be crossed without consequence, Eric sees something else beneath it, a mistake. A serious one, a dangerous one, but still a mistake made by someone who belongs to this family, someone who, in his mind, deserves at least the chance to confront what she has done and attempt to make it right. That perspective, however, does not land gently with the rest of the family, especially not with Steffi Forrester, whose reaction is immediate, visceral, and rooted in a very different understanding of what leadership requires, because for Steffi, this is not just about Ivy. It is about what her actions represent. The manipulation of Electra Forrester, the deliberate sabotage of her relationship with Will Spencer, and the broader implication that someone within their own family is willing to interfere in deeply personal ways without regard for the damage it causes. And for Steffi, allowing that behavior to go unpunished is not an act of compassion. It is a failure of leadership, a message that the company and the family will tolerate deception as long as it comes from one of their own. The confrontation between Eric and Steffi is not just heated, it is generational, ideological, and deeply personal, because what they are really arguing about is not Ivy's fate, but the values that will define Forrester Creations moving forward. And in that moment, their differences become impossible to ignore. Eric stands firmly in the belief that family must be preserved, that forgiveness is not weakness but strength, that giving Ivy a final chance is not an endorsement of her actions, but a recognition of her humanity. While Steffi sees that same decision as dangerous, as naive, as a refusal to confront the reality that some actions cannot be undone, and that protecting the integrity of the company sometimes requires making painful, decisive choices, even when those choices involve turning against someone you love. Standing between them, caught in the emotional crossfire, is Ridge Forrester, who understands both perspectives perhaps more clearly than anyone else, because he has spent his life navigating the same tension between loyalty and responsibility, between protecting his family and leading it. And now he finds himself in a position where there is no easy path, no compromise that will satisfy both sides, because any decision he supports will inevitably alienate someone, and that reality weighs heavily on him, because he knows that what is happening now is not just a temporary conflict. It is the beginning of something deeper, something that could permanently alter the relationships within this family. Eric's decision to give Ivy one final chance does not come without conditions, and that is where the emotional complexity deepens, because he is not simply excusing her behavior, he is demanding accountability, demanding that she confront what she has done, that she acknowledge the harm she has caused, and that she prove, through her actions, that she can be trusted again. But even that is not enough for Steffi, because from her perspective, the damage has already been done, the trust has already been broken. And no amount of apology or redemption can undo the impact of Ivy's manipulation, especially on Electra, who is still trying to process the betrayal of someone she once saw as a protector. Electra's presence in this situation adds another layer of emotional intensity, because she is not just an observer, she is the one who has been directly affected, the one whose life was quietly reshaped by Ivy's actions, and her response to Eric's decision is not one of anger alone, but of confusion, of hurt, of the unsettling realization that even now, even after everything has been revealed, her pain is being weighed against the idea of family unity, and that realization forces her to confront a difficult truth, that in this family, loyalty is not always simple, that it can sometimes come at the cost of individual justice, and that understanding creates a distance between her and the people she once trusted, a distance that may not be easily bridged. As the conflict escalates, the divisions within the family become more pronounced, with members quietly aligning themselves with one side or the other, some drawn to Eric's belief in forgiveness and unity, others firmly standing behind Steffi's insistence on accountability and consequence. And that division begins to ripple through the company itself, affecting not only personal relationships but professional dynamics, because when leadership is divided, uncertainty follows, and uncertainty, in a place like Forrester Creations, can be just as damaging as any external threat. Steffi's ultimatum, her threat to leave the company if Eric does not reconsider his decision, is not made lightly, and it carries a weight that cannot be ignored, because she is not just another employee, she is a co-CEO, a driving force behind the company's success. And her departure would not only destabilize the business, but send a powerful message about the internal state of the Forrester family, a message that could have far-reaching consequences beyond the walls of their offices, and Eric knows this. He understands the risk, the potential fallout, the possibility that his decision could cost him not only the unity he is trying to preserve, but the future of the company itself. And yet, he does not back down, because for Eric, this is not just about the present moment. It is about the legacy he leaves behind, the values that will define this family long after he is gone, and in his mind, abandoning Ivy without giving her the chance to redeem herself would be a betrayal of those values, a surrender to a more ruthless, less compassionate way of leading, and he cannot accept that, not after everything he has built, not after everything this family has endured. The tension reaches a breaking point as the reality of the situation becomes unavoidable, as it becomes clear that no matter what decision is made, the family will not emerge from this unscathed, and that is where the true drama lies, not in the outcome itself, but in the process of getting there. In the emotional battles, the difficult conversations, the painful realizations that force each character to confront who they are and what they stand for, and as the lines are drawn and the stakes continue to rise, one thing becomes certain: this is no longer just about Ivy. This is about the future of the Forrester family and whether it can survive the weight of its own contradictions. Because in the end, what is being tested is not just loyalty or leadership, but the very idea of what it means to be a family in a world where power, ambition, and personal desire are constantly pulling people in different directions. And as this crisis unfolds, it becomes clear that the answer to that question will not come easily. It will be fought for, argued over, and ultimately defined by the choices each of them makes when faced with the impossible task of choosing between love and truth. And whether those two things can still exist together in the same space is a question that may not have an answer at all. What happens next does not explode all at once, and that is what makes it far more dangerous, because after Eric Forrester makes his decision to give Ivy Forrester one final chance, the room does not erupt into chaos the way everyone expects. It falls into something colder, something more unsettling, a silence that feels like the calm before something irreversible begins to take shape. And in that silence, every person present understands that the battle is no longer about persuading Eric to change his mind. It is about what each of them is willing to do now that he refuses to, and no one feels that shift more sharply than Steffi Forrester, because in that moment, she realizes something she has been trying to deny, that this is not a disagreement that will resolve itself with time or compromise. This is a line in the sand, and her grandfather has chosen his side. Steffi does not argue immediately after that, not in the way she did before, because something inside her hardens, something settles into place with a clarity that is almost frightening, and when she finally speaks, her voice is not raised, it is controlled, precise, and far more dangerous than anger, because she is no longer trying to convince Eric. She is informing him, telling him that if this decision stands, she will walk away, not in protest, not temporarily, but completely, and that shift transforms the situation entirely. Because this is no longer about Ivy's redemption, It is about the survival of the company as it currently exists, because losing Steffi would not just be a personal loss, it would be a structural one, a fracture that could destabilize everything Eric has spent his life building. Ridge Forrester feels that impact immediately because he understands both sides in a way that makes his position almost unbearable. He sees the value in Eric's belief that family must be given the chance to heal, but he also sees the reality of what Steffi is saying. That leadership cannot function if it tolerates manipulation and then protects it under the banner of unity, and that internal conflict begins to pull him apart because no matter where he stands, he will be choosing one part of his family over another. And that is a choice he has spent his entire life trying to avoid. Meanwhile, Ivy, who only moments ago stood on the brink of exile, begins to understand that Eric's decision has given her something far more powerful than she expected, not forgiveness, but time, and time, in a situation like this, is the most dangerous currency of all. Because it allows her to reposition herself, to reshape the narrative, to attempt to regain control over a situation that had nearly slipped beyond her reach. And what makes Ivy so compelling in this moment is not just her desperation, but her refusal to see herself as the villain. She still believes, deeply and stubbornly, that what she did was justified, that she was protecting Electra Forrester from a path that would only lead to pain, and that belief fuels her next moves, because she does not see redemption as admitting fault. She sees it as proving that her judgment was right all along. Electra, watching all of this unfold, feels something shift inside her as well, but unlike Steffi, her reaction is not immediate defiance. It is something quieter, something more complex, because while she understands Eric's desire to preserve the family, she cannot ignore what Ivy did to her. The manipulation, the control, the quiet rewriting of her reality, and the idea that Ivy is being given another chance, even under strict conditions, feels like a betrayal of her own experience. And that creates a distance between her and the rest of the family that she does not yet know how to close, because she is no longer sure where she stands in a world where her pain can be acknowledged and yet not fully acted upon. As the days pass, the consequences of Eric's decision begin to ripple outward in ways that no one can fully control, because Steffi does not back down. She begins to prepare for her departure in a way that is both deliberate and deeply unsettling, stepping back from key decisions, delegating responsibilities, creating a visible gap in leadership that forces everyone to confront what the company would look like without her, and that absence, even before it becomes permanent, begins to destabilize the environment, because people are no longer sure who is in charge, no longer sure which direction the company is moving in, and that uncertainty creates cracks that extend far beyond the boardroom. Ridge, caught in the middle, attempts to mediate, to find some kind of middle ground, but the more he tries, the more he realizes that there is no compromise that will satisfy both Eric and Steffi, because their positions are not just different, they are fundamentally opposed. One rooted in preservation, the other in accountability, and as that realization settles in, Ridge is forced to confront a truth he has long avoided, that sometimes leadership requires choosing not between right and wrong, but between two conflicting versions of what is right, and accepting that either way, something valuable will be lost. And Ivy, sensing the growing division, begins to act, not recklessly but strategically, attempting to rebuild alliances within the company, to position herself as someone who can still contribute, who can still prove her value. And yet every effort she makes is shadowed by the knowledge of what she has done, by the distrust that now surrounds her, by the quiet judgment in the eyes of those who have not forgotten, and that tension begins to wear on her, because while she was prepared to fight for her place, she was not prepared for the isolation that comes with being allowed to stay but not fully accepted, and that isolation becomes its own kind of pressure, one that could either push her toward genuine reflection or drive her deeper into the belief that she must prove herself at any cost. The breaking point comes not in a single dramatic explosion, but in a series of smaller moments that accumulate until they can no longer be contained. A missed opportunity here, a tense interaction there, a decision that reveals just how divided the leadership has become. And when the company begins to feel the impact externally, when partners start to question the stability of Forrester Creations, when whispers of internal conflict begin to spread, the crisis can no longer be framed as a family matter. it becomes a business threat, one that demands resolution whether the family is ready for it or not. And that is where Eric is forced to face the true cost of his decision, not in theory, but in reality, because the unity he was trying to protect is already fracturing, the family he hoped to preserve is already dividing, and the company he built is beginning to feel the strain of that division. And in that moment, the question is no longer whether Ivy deserves a second chance, but whether the family can survive the consequences of giving it to her, and whether Eric himself is willing to accept that sometimes. Holding on too tightly to the idea of unity can be just as destructive as letting it go. Because in the end, what this storyline reveals is something far more profound than a simple conflict over one person's actions. It exposes the fragile balance between love and power, between forgiveness and accountability. And the painful reality that even the strongest families can be brought to the edge when those forces begin to pull them in different directions. And as everything continues to unfold, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The Forster family is no longer fighting over Ivy. They are fighting over what kind of family they are willing to become, and that is a battle that will not be resolved.